At this time, we're looking for an approval of the agenda as it currently stands. Any questions of the agenda from council or staff?
Mr. Mayor, I make a motion that we approve the agenda as presented.
Thank you. Can I get a second?
I'll second.
All in favor?
Aye.
All opposed? Thank you. The ayes have it. We will now be moving on to our public hearing for this evening.
Mr. Mayor,
Yes.
is now the time to defer one.
No, not till after I read
We
it.
need a motion to go into public hearing.
Read it before we enter public. Or
Motion first.
looking for a motion to enter public.
Mr. Mayor, I would move that, we would move into the public hearing. This time.
Thank you.
Regular council meeting.
Thank you, Councilmember Tan. Can I get a second for the motion, please?
I'll
second that. All in favor?
Aye.
All opposed? There you have it. Ladies and gentlemen, I call this hearing of the Umatilla City Council to order. A sign-up list is available for those who wish to testify. Person must testify either orally or written in order to be considered a party to the decision and opportunity to appeal. Copies of the application criteria are available to staff. Appeal hearing conducted by the city council shall be on the record, and issues under consideration shall be limited to those listed in the notice of appeal. Failure to raise an issue with statement or evidence sufficient and other interested persons an opportunity to respond to that issue may be precluded. Appeal to the land use board of appeals on that issue. If new information is presented, the hearing may request a continuance to allow additional time to respond. You may also request that the record remain open. Your request must be made while the record is open. Procedure for the hearing and order of presentations are as follows. Staff will summarize the application. The applicant may present testimony. 3, the public testimony in favor of the application. 4, public testimony in opposition of the application. 5, neutral testimony. 6, rebuttal testimony from the applicant. 7, the record is closed. 8, the actual deliberations, and 9, the city council vote. And that concludes the announcements. We will begin with the first business item on agenda. Is there a challenge to the jurisdiction of the Umatilla City Council to hear this matter? If so, please state the challenge at this time. Yeah, it's if you have a challenge to the jurisdiction. So do you disagree that we are the wrong chamber to discuss this? Are there any conflicts of interest or personal biases to be declared by a council member? If so, please state the bias or conflict at this time. I would like to declare that I have a potential conflict of interest. My parents own property on Rio Sendo, along with my grandmother.
I need to actually declare an actual conflict. I do live on Rio Cinda, and my family is also just doing business with UEC.
Any other conflicts at this time? Thank you. Has there been an ex parte contact regarding the upcoming matter that a council member needs to declare? If so, please state the ex parte contact at this time. Okay, at this time, there are no one, and I'm looking for a sound report. Brandon, feel free.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. First to start, I wanted to provide one clarification. I've had a couple people asking, even some council members this today. Just to clarify, you had to be a party, meaning you had to submit comments at one of the planning commissions, either orally or in writing, to be considered a party to that decision. There is nothing in code that would prohibit somebody who did not participate in planning commission from participating tonight. I had mistakenly told some folks that you had to be considered a party to be able to participate tonight. Legal counsel confirmed there is not such a requirement in our code. So if somebody wanted to come up and provide public comment tonight, even if they did not participate at the planning commission meetings, they would be allowed to do so. I would just request that you guys get over there and sign in so we can make sure we get you called. Mr. Mayor, it's looking like there's about 17 folks who have signed in so far. So I would recommend that we institute some sort of time limit, probably in the 5-minute mark, so that we have time to get through everybody. Is there any questions before I actually move into the staff report?
I think 5 is sufficient.
Okay. So to provide a brief overview, the Umatilla Planning Commission considered this application and held a public hearing on 2 different dates. The original one was on August 27th, and then it was continued to September 24th. And ultimately findings were adopted on October 22nd. Because this is an appeal hearing, we are limited to what is in the record. So this is not a de novo hearing, meaning we are limited. Council is going to be limited on making a decision based off what is currently in your packets. That is what the findings are. That is the entire set of the records. So our decisions tonight need to be based on what is in the record. New evidence cannot be allowed to be submitted tonight. We are also limited to only those items that are in the applicant's notice of appeal. That is included in yours packets, and they primarily raise 3 issues. Staff will kind of work through those as we go along. I will do my best if folks come up and trying to offer new comment. If you see me waving, I probably have a comment or something. If I will try and do my best to help filter some of that. But moving on to the actual application, looking at the staff report, there are a number of criteria. Ultimately tonight, and if you look through the staff report, the majority of the criteria we have when it comes to permitting utility facilities are not applicable. We have multiple standards, but most of them to relate to more traditional commercial or industrial development when you're talking about access and building orientation and windows and store frontage. As you actually read through the staff report that the Planning Commission adopted, there are only 4 or 5 criteria that are actually applicable to utility facilities in this case. Ultimately, Planning Commission denied this application on only 1 criteria, which comes down to site selection. So really that is all we are looking at tonight. There were several other issues that came up during the public hearing. In fact, the overwhelming majority of public comments were related to some of those other concerns, such as fires, impacts to views, impacts to property values, undergrounding of the transmission, and wildlife. Planning Commission ultimately found that those could all be satisfied through appropriate conditions of approval, more or less requiring UBC to construct, maintain, and operate the proposed transmission line in accordance with state and federal law. It's staff's recommendation that we don't have the ability to regulate those ideas, and those are not items that we'd be considering. So really what we are narrowing down to tonight in this appeals hearing is this site appropriate for the use that is being proposed? So in the applicant's notice of appeal, they pointed to 3 items. Item number 1 was what they called alternative routes. I do want to point out that UBC called out a factual error in the staff report. So staff, in the staff report, it says that there is an alternative route located within our UGB that would need to be considered. For those of you who are familiar with the area, there's an existing transmission line on the south side of Highway 730 that runs out to the port. That transmission line was brought up during the public hearing process. Staff wrongly concluded that that was completely within our UGB. As you get about past Willamette Street, our UGB actually goes right up to the south side of 730. Technically, that transmission line is in a private easement just on the south side of 730. So it is literally on the other side of the line, but it is outside of our urban growth boundary. So staff wanted to note that that was a factual error on my part, and wanted to note that there is only 1 proposed route in the applicant's material that would be 100% inside our UGB. The second part of that is that the Planning Commission ultimately determined that there was a lack of information in the packet for them to be able to approve the application. There was a number of comments related to alternate routes and, could there be a better route within the city limits? As it's addressed in the legal memo that is in your packet from our lawyer, and David Peterson, who is our legal attorney who's helping me on this, is also on the call if you guys have any additional questions for him. But code doesn't require the applicant in this case to consider alternatives. Really, all it requires them to do is show that this site is appropriate considering the current zoning and standards that we have on the books. Considering that has a public facility comprehensive plan designation, and there are multiple existing transmission lines and other utility facilities on there, it was staff's recommendation that that was met. Or that that site is appropriate considering the underlying zoning. The second part, or the applicant's second issue in the notice of appeal, really boiled down to rejecting of their routing study. So UEC originally submitted a summary of a routing study, and it referenced two other larger routing studies that they had completed in the lead up to this process. Staff believes that a summary of the routing study, and well, I guess I'll back up a step there. City Council will have to make a determination if that summary of two other routing studies is sufficient to be able to determine if the site is appropriate, considering the other impacts. I apologize. Item number 3, which is really the way it was addressed in Tonkin Torps, this is probably still number 2 on the applicant's kind of notice of intent to appeal, is that really wanted to be able to see all of the data and have access to all the alternative routing studies. Ultimately, it's staff's recommendation, and legal counsel confirmed that that likely exceeded the planning commission's authority. We don't have the ability to tell them what information they should submit. And just because another document might exist out there that could answer some of those questions, we are bound to make decisions on just what is submitted. Again, it is staff's opinion that a summary prepared by engineers that is summarizing other larger technical efforts to determine what is the correct location is likely sufficient to be able to meet that evidence burden, but that is something that City Council will have to determine. Legal counsel kind of gave you that in 3 different questions to be able to answer. I'm happy to get in those in a little bit more detail if you wanted me to, but that's really the question tonight, is based on the evidence that is in the record, is this the correct site and location? The last item came down to an issue of fire hazard. Ultimately, there was a little bit of a conflict in the staff report where we found that, like I said, if UEC constructed the line to state and federal standards, that would meet fire regulations and that would be considered satisfactory. It isn't a requirement for them to actually submit their wildfire hazard mitigation plan. Just referencing that there is a publicly adopted wildfire mitigation plan that they're required to file with the state, and that being available publicly online on the state's website is sufficient for us to be able to acknowledge that UEC does have a wildfire mitigation plan and accept that into the record. Happy. So again, I just wanted to kind of focus in. Ultimately, what we're looking at is this site appropriate? I'm happy to kind of answer any questions on this, but it is a fairly large packet. We have both the applicant's information, the staff report, and then the memo from legal. I'm happy to answer any questions that you might have, but want to be mindful that there are a lot of folks in the room who are going to want to talk besides me and make sure that they have the opportunity to do so.
And on page 22 of our packet, we've got a section that says views of property value. Can you expand on that a little bit more? It mentions on the Umatilla County 1972 zoning ordinance section 7.0403. Expand a little bit on that for me, please.
Yeah, so there are 2 different sections of code that are in the staff report that address views. Let me back up a little bit. So the primary property in question here is a large Army Corps piece of property that is technically located outside the city's UGB. So property, outside of city limits, but inside our urban growth boundaries. So properties that are outside our city limits, but inside the urban growth boundary fall under the county's 1972 code. So while we have planning authority from the county to be able to process all applications within our UGB, we still have to apply that old county 1972 code where a transmission line in this case would cross properties that are outside city limits inside the UGB or kind of in the urban area, if you will. In that 1972 code, and it is addressed, I think, a little bit later in the staff report, I actually have the standard pulled in there. It almost mirrors our language that is in city code. Ultimately, there's a single standard relating to siting of utility facilities, mainly cell towers and transmission lines. Both the city code and county code just require that an applicant either give consideration to, or I forget the exact language. Sorry. Or, yeah, they have to give consideration to aesthetic values or aesthetic impacts. So again, the requirement doesn't require them to completely mitigate potential impacts to views. It just requires them, they would have to show that impacts to views were considered. Did that answer your question, Mr. Mayor?
It is the staff's opinion that they have considered these.
So again, in staff's opinion, it doesn't require them to mitigate potential impacts to views. It just shows that they had to make they just had to take that potential impacts to views into consideration. Given that the applicant submitted in their application that they had done renderings and modelings. So originally it was proposed to be 2 transmission lines. So they went to a double circuited approach. And I'm sure the applicant can give you a little bit better information on some of this. There were several design considerations. So they went away from the typical H-frame steel lattice structures that you would see more typically along most VPA transmission routes as single steel monopoles. They made it a double circuit transmission line instead of having to run 2 transmission lines. In staff's opinion, that was sufficient to be able to show that they had taken the impacts of the views into consideration, and to the extent practical, they had tried to minimize those impacts.
Thank you. Any further questions at this time for? Okay, we'll go ahead and move on to the applicant may present testimony this time. Oh, no, you're good.
I just left, so.
Yeah, you're good. At this time, I'd like to make sure we have it documented. We did excuse Councilmember Watt at 3 o'clock. Nancy's marking it down. Sorry for making it down.
Good evening. For the record, my name is Tom Brooks.
I apologize. I mixed up with someone else.
Oh,
Sorry.
oh, you called me Josh.
Yeah, I did. I apologize.
My name is Tommy Brooks. I'm a land use attorney. I represent Utah Electric Cooperative. We're going to divide up our presentation tonight between a few people. With me is Robert Eckenrode, who's the general manager and CEO of UEC. We have other members of UEC's team here. I don't think we're going to need to present, just they're here if there have any questions that are relevant to their expertise.
I'm sorry to interrupt. Can you please speak into the microphone so the audio recording can take it up,
Yeah.
please?
Is that better?
Oh, yeah.
I'll hold it really close.
Thank you.
When Mr. Eckenrode comes up, he's going to give a brief overview, just kind of UEC. Not that that's necessarily critical to the appeal tonight, but I think the context is really important since this is the first of this project's in front of this board. And basically, we're just going to highlight some of the information that's already in the record. Since this record's on the appeal. So we'll start with Mr. Eckenrode, and I'll come back up to present the rest of the appeal.
Thank you, Tom. Good evening, Councilor. Thank you for the opportunity to speak on behalf of our application for a transmission line. My name is Robert Eckenrode. I'm the general manager and CEO of Utah Electric. And, I want to talk about who we are. We are Utah. And we provide service to the community and have done so for generations. 87 years, we have provided a very valuable resource to the community and all the communities that we serve. We're sensitive to the importance and the impacts in our community, particularly of distribution lines, transmission, and substation. It is an impactful business that we do, and we want to be sensitive to those items. The relationships we hold in our community is important to us, and we do our best to listen and engage with the community. In the communities that we serve, there are many faceted aspects of what's important. And we want to take into those many views to ensure that we meet the community's needs. You know, our responsibilities are to serve everyone. We have over 500 homes and businesses in the city of Umatilla that we serve. You know, it's interesting to note that in our strategic plan, we have a goal of removing barriers to prosperity in the communities. Ironically, the city of Umatilla has strategic plans that also ask to have these barriers removed. We actually call for the strong support of the development of data centers and to listen to developers' partners in the community. We would like to think we are one of the partners to ensure that we're listening and providing what's best for the city of Umatilla. We have heard, we continue to listen, and we engage. We've had town hall meetings, met with planning staff. We've even gone door to door to do our best to engage with those involved so that we can hear and provide the services that we call to do. UEC is here to send the right message. We hope that the city can also send the same message that you're here and open for business for the community. Some of the items that we do, in addition to just providing electric service, our commitment to the community, we provide $1 million in franchise fees for the city of Umatilla. That's on an annual basis. And in 2025, that number increases to $1.5 million. We continue to support city events. We're very active in the community with chambers. We provide all kinds of support and all kinds of coalition with the community. We like to think we can be part of Umatilla's success and prosperity. And so therefore, I'd like to ask Tommy to come back up and speak to the field that we have.
We have just a couple slides. This is information was already in the record, so I won't spend much time on it. But I think it's critical to acknowledge front end that, you know, UEC doesn't build things that they want to, they build things that they need to, like Mr. Eckert said, to be able to provide service. So there is an established purpose and need for transmission line, and that challenge. Brandon gave a pretty good overview. This is a 230 kV double circuit line. UEC did change it to be able to do this on single pole structure, with just a few exceptions. There were some crossings that they have to design it a little bit differently. But that's within an area where there's already some transmission lines. One of the key things that informs the pole analysis are endpoints. I mean, with a linear project, you're not just kind of putting it where you think you can go. You're usually going from point to point, and so that just kind of automatically limits the velocity you have that are available to you. It's a relatively short line, just over 5 miles. And this map up here shows you the route, and that should be in your materials as well. I want to spend a little bit of time on this. You know, I guess before we get to the substance of it, and just to reiterate what's in your city attorney's memo, what Brandon said, that the scope of this appeal really is narrow, and it is just this one criterion that asks you to look at the suitability of the site. To answer that question, you are bound to base it on evidence that's in the record and not evidence that's not in the record. That's a really important theme, I think, tonight. You know, we're still happy to answer questions if you need it at the end about the evidence that is in the record. We'll do one more slide.
Your clicker's not working, so
Thank you.
do you want one more?
A little bit of context here about the alternative sites or alternative routes, because that was really a lot of the discussion that happened at the Planning Commission. UEC did consider alternative routes, and it typically does that any project, or on a lot of projects like this. Because, and even when it's not required, it's part of being, what we call prudent utility practices. UEC is a utility that collects its costs from its member customers. So it's got to make sure it only builds what it needs. It's got to make sure it does it in an efficient manner, and that it puts lines like this in places that are feasible to build. And the alternatives analysis helps identify reasonable alternatives and make sure that they're meeting those goals. But it also helps explain why when we get to a place like this, we can say, well, this is why we're here, this is why we did this somewhere else. And I think that's helpful. But then we talk about the land use process, and I think, fundamental to the land use application is that each application has to be considered on its own merits, regardless of what alternatives exist. There are situations in the land use world where you look at alternatives. So for example, if you're involved in the UGB expansion, you have to look at alternatives and show that you considered all the things but that's a very express state law requirement. For development applications, once the code is established, once your comp plan is static, the alternatives are rarely ever required in the code. But again, they can be informative, but they're not the basis for the decision. And I guess just to kind of summarize that point, the fact that UEC identified potential alternative routes, I think that was a source of confusion for the Planning Commission, and we're hoping to kind of clear that up tonight. Getting back to that main criteria, is this site suitable? This is what we found through our alternative analysis, right? That analysis showed our beginning and endpoints, and it showed how we could get there. And one of the ways to get there was to go through the route that we've identified, which is acknowledged by staff is facilities overlay or comp plan. And a large part of the line goes through that area. That area is specifically designed. If you look at the comp plan language, it's explicitly designed to accommodate utilities and not just utilities, but electric transmission. Our position is that designation alone demonstrates that the site is suitable. If the properties that are planned for transmission lines are suitable for transmission lines, then it's hard to imagine where in the city you could. This is the place kind of designated. Additionally, what the alternatives route analysis that we did, what it revealed is that the other alternatives required us to go onto farmland, and it required us to go to the EFU zoning designation that the county has. What's really key to that is that in this circumstance, state law doesn't allow us to go into the EFU zone. That sounds confusing because when you drive around and see transmission lines in the EFU all the time. But again, each line has to be based on the application that's done at the time. And here, given the two endpoints that we have, and the fact that there is a route through the city or through the city's UGB, what the state law says is that you can't be in the farm zone. Anytime we permit a transmission line in the farm zone is because there's not a way to get between points A and B and staying out of the farm zone. And this whole concept called utility facility necessary to be in the farm zone. And here it's not necessary, therefore state law prevents us from doing it. There was some discussion about these statutes at the Planning Commission, but I think there's a lot of confusion. They didn't know which statutes applied, which didn't. There was a lot of references, and the deliberation was very confusing. So I wanted to spend some time with you to really try to hammer that home. It's not that the EFU statute does or doesn't allow transmission lines. It allows them in some circumstances. It just doesn't allow it.
Can you elaborate on?
I'm sorry.
Can you elaborate on more? So what is, I guess, I'm just, in the previous statute, there was other situations where it was allowed, and then this situation it wasn't.
Right. So
Simply because there's another route that's available, or?
correct. So the specific references are ORS 215, 283.1, which describes what we call outright permitted uses, non-farm uses in farm zone, and 215, 275, which is specifically utility facilities necessary for public service. And the transmission line falls into those two categories. Utility facility necessary for public service if it meets the criteria that are set forth in 215-275. Those criteria, and if you look and how LUBA and the Court of Appeals and the Supreme Court have interpreted that, says the utility is necessary if it needs to be in the farm zone because, and it lists a bunch of factors, one of which is there's no route outside of the farm zone that's feasible through either a city or what we call non-resource. And so the non-resource designation is what applies to the city outside of the UGB or inside the UGB, but outside of the city. It used to be farmland, but now it's non-resource. It's not protected farmland.
So then how are there power lines onto these properties currently? Because there's power lines to these ones we've highlighted before. So this land was available at that point in time as well when it was installed. How is this?
Right, because for those power lines, I don't know, it depends on what the starting and ending points. But for that project, presumably, they have a starting and end point that didn't allow them to stay wholly within the city. And so because there wasn't a continuous route through the city or through UGB, they met the criteria of 215-275. And so it really depends on the project. So I know the ones that I've helped cite and I think that those exactly how we've done it. But we had to go through that analysis first to show that there's no place between point A and point B that stays outside of the farm zone. Here, we don't have that circumstance. Here, point A and point B are in either urban or non-resource lands, and there is a route between there that stays there. And so that alone kicks us out of our ability to go into the farm. If we could go to the next slide. Right, so that's the context for all of this. It's sort of why we had to be there, why we rejected other sites or other routes, and found this favorable zoning in the city that's planned for this very purpose. And that's what we presented to the planning commission, and then they issued their decision. This first issue, I think Brandon covered it already. I don't want to belabor this, but part of the findings was that we actually did have another route that was fully within the city, but it was undisputed that we don't, and I think that's been corrected. Brandon confirmed it just now. That's stated in your city attorney's memo. That was the basis for the appeal. That was pretty simple, but on that basis alone, that's why you can't just affirm the planning commission's decision because it's just factually incorrect. We can go to the next slide, please. So this is, and by the way, I'm following the order of the city attorney's memo. I think he did a good job kind of teasing apart what we said and trying to give it to you in bite-sized chunks. So I'm just sort of following the way he said it. I think that's useful. So the second issue then, this relates to what we think was the planning commission's improper reliance on the availability of alternative routes. Now, some of this doesn't show up in their actual findings, but it was part of the deliberation. Gosh, did you really look hard enough somewhere else? Did you try to go somewhere else? Do we believe you that you couldn't be in the farm zone? And I understand the curiosity in trying to get to those issues, but that's not the question. The availability of alternatives, it's just not relevant in this particular land use application. Let me put it this way. So, I mean, even if an alternative route is available, that's not enough to conclude that this route doesn't meet the criteria. And that's the only analysis you can go through is, does this route meet these criteria? And nowhere in the code does it require the applicant to come forward with an alternatives analysis and to show that this is the only feasible alternative, or even that this is the best alternative. Again, you might do that in the UGB context when you're expanding the UGB, but not for a conditional use permit for a transmission line. This is where I would urge you to look at what the city attorney's memo says, and I think he acknowledges that if the city denies this application is based on considering alternative routes, a legal challenge to that does have merit, and that's exactly the kind of arguments we'd be making. And That memo does offer maybe an alternative you can try to do, which is, well, maybe we can make alternative routes one of the factors, because this criterion says, here's the fact that we want you to look at transportation, access, and other things. This could be another thing. But we disagree, because your code actually does require alternatives in some situations. Just as an example, you have off-street parking requirements, and it says when any new off-street parking is provided, parking areas shall be located behind buildings or side yard, quote, unless there is no feasible alternative. So there, your code is like, show us this is the only feasible alternative. Same thing with right-of-way access. Access to the public right-of-way is not to be located within the vision clearance areas unless there is no alternative for access to the site. So where your code intends for the applicant to rely on or to have to explore alternatives, it says it. And the fact that it doesn't say it in this criterion is the end of the story. We can go to the next slide. So this third issue, this is about the routing study that was submitted into the record. And yes, it was a summary of other information, but the real issue here is UEC did provide the factual evidence, and this is evidence that is in the record and really was unchallenged by anyone before the planning commission. So it wasn't even just a matter of was it persuasive or not. It was the only evidence about kind of why we are where we are. And this is, again, where I want to highlight one of the sentences in your city attorney's memo that says, you know, the city cannot make a decision based on what's not in the record. The findings have to weigh the evidence that support the decision-making body. And I think what's interesting about the planning commission's decision is they completely ignored the evidence. It was not just, I keep hearing, you know, it's a summary. It was not a summary. If we could go to the next slide. So, you know, part of it included, okay, well, let's look at some of the alternative routes. We go to the next slide. This is the one I really want to go. Sorry, we could go one more. This is what I really want to see. This is I think this is the very last page of your packet tonight. This is the table that was included. So after pages and pages of discussion about why UEC chose this route, it also included this table. And this table for each route, it shows hard data. It talks about the number of crossings of roads. It talks about acres of wetlands impacted. It's very quantitative. It's very qualitative. It's very thorough. This one sheet is more than a lot of alternatives analysis would be just in general. And this was in front of the planning commission. And I don't think they looked for it. I think they heard that, oh, there was no way to test everything that our engineer was saying, but it was there to be tested, and no one did. No one disputed the number of acres of wetlands that were being crossed. No one disputed the number of easements that were going to have to be acquired. All this information in detail was right in front of the planning commission. If we could go one more slide, this is just a snapshot. This is about, you know, a half a page or 2 pages, but the engineer also identified the references where those numbers came from, you know, looking at other studies that had been done and pull that together. So it's simply just not a case of it being a summary and looking for ways of good enough. This was detailed and it was comprehensive and it was unchallenged. You can go to the next slide, please. This sounds to me like it's cutting in and out. I just want to make sure you can hear me.
Yeah.
Okay. The last issue is the fire risk. And I think staff did a good job just addressing this one. To us, this is again, you know, the planning commission attempting to oppose a requirement that's not in the code. It said, we want you to demonstrate how fire hazards with this line compared to fire hazards on the other line. And that's just, again, that's irrelevant. That's asking us to do a study that's not required and to compare evidence that's not in the record. And then I think what got us too is that the planning commission, again, when it came to fire risk for other criteria, it actually said, Well, we don't regulate fire risk, and the best way, the best way to address it is a condition of approval requiring the applicant to comply with federal and state standards. So for the, for one decision, it's like, well, the best way to do this is through a condition of approval because we don't care. But when it came to this criterion, the planning commission just said, well, we think you should have done more. So very inconsistent internally with the planning commission's own decision, but also just not in line with what's required of the applicant.
Can I ask you a question on that real quick?
Do that.
So on memorandum, from our lawyer, on page 14 of the packet, page 4 memorandum, mentioned in there, it says, UMC 10-1204, is met. Do you have any comments about that? Says, the quote is thus, the council must first determine if it considers fire safety relevant to whether or not UMC 10-1204 is met, given.
Right, so I think what, you'll have to ask your attorney what he meant by that particular sentence, but I think he was saying, it's up to you to decide if this is relevant to determining if that criteria is met. We think it's not relevant, but even to the extent it is relevant, we addressed the concern as it was raised in the record. So the concerns offered by most of the testimony were transmission lines, start fires, we're worried about. That's a very generic statement, has nothing to do about this site. It has nothing to do with Umatilla Electric Cooperative's transmission lines. It just said, there was a fire in this part of the state, there was a fire in California, very generic. And so because it wasn't specifically tied to this criterion, it was very generic, we responded in kind with the generic response, which is, no, we know that transmission lines have some risk, but we mitigate that risk through our wildfire mitigation. So just to wrap this up, I want to be forceful here about what I think the law is and how I think the facts apply to the law and what the planning commission did and how they erred. I don't want to leave you with the impression that me or UEC doesn't, that we're not sensitive to the concerns that are raised with the planning commission, and we expect you're going to hear some of those same concerns from me. And it's my job as sort of the attorney here for UEC to say, I think those concerns respectfully are just misplaced. I mean, we're in a quasi-judicial process here. There's a criterion that has to be addressed, and the concerns and the testimony need to address that criterion. And I think what we heard at the planning commission was kind of a steady drumbeat that transmission lines don't belong in this area, right? There's good news here. We don't think they should be here, but that question's already been answered. The city's done the comprehensive planning for that area. It's labeled that area as public facilities. It's suitable for this area. I understand that people don't like that, but the time and place to address that is when the city adopts a comprehensive plan or when changes its comprehensive plan. Similarly, we heard a strong desire to put the line somewhere else, but that still doesn't address the criterion that it may be able to meet the criteria somewhere else, but the question is, does it meet the criteria here? And we just can't make up the planning rules as we go. If we do that, nothing's ever going to be built. So what the planning commission needed to do was to apply the code as it exists today. We don't think they did that, but we hope that you will. So with that, I'm opening up to other questions or maybe more testimony.
Council, any questions at this time? Thank you for your time. So we'll have public testimony in opposition of the application. First up, we have Denise Bill Platt. I'll give your name, address for the record. And your 5 minutes.
Hello, my name is Denise Pratt. I'm here instead of Bill. He's homesick. Well, want you to know also that I put this up. There's a lot of talk with acronyms, and I don't know what those mean. I don't know if anybody else is like that too. And I had to keep looking, even though I wrote it. I had to look at it several times tonight to remember what EFU was. So can everybody see that or no? I'm not sure. Don't you want to hold it? No.
Can you see your address real quick for me?
Pardon
Can
me?
you see your address, please?
Oh, I'm sorry. 148 Rio Senda. I'm going to give a little bit of an overview also. My husband and I moved to Umatilla on Rio Senda Street in March of 2022. Because of his doctor's suggestion to move to a drier climate for his health and our desire to stay in Oregon, he started researching the eastern part of the state. He discovered our current fabulous house with its spectacular view of the Columbia River and the Washington hillside. We bought the house and moved immediately. In anticipation of embracing our new community, we went to a city council meet the candidates meeting and ended up voting for Mayor Sykes. This year we voted for Darren for city council. Now, we don't know how all of the ways that city planning works. Yet moving into a small community, we expected to be more in the know than we did in Portland. I'm sad to say the opposite is what we have experienced. We hear about events at the library, at the marina, even at the golf course, all good things. But we were blindsided about the plan to install these 135-foot power poles smack dab in our line of sight to the beautiful view that we had moved 180 miles for. How did it get this far in the process without the citizens of McNairy being notified? We heard this had been in the works for over 2 years. And why only the north side of Rio Senda and Riverside notified? All of McNairy should have been notified. Yes, we have heard that it was along the city guidelines of notification, but along other communication that has been lacking, we think that needs to be changed. We do not have law degrees. While I have tried to read all of the paperwork attached to this UEC plan, I do not understand all of the intricacies, nor should any of us citizens really be expected to. That is what we expect from our city council. We understand that the proposed plan may be the shortest route, but is it the smartest? While UEC is reluctant to put these poles along Highway 730, it seems to us that putting them next to existing power lines is just common sense. We appreciate all the time and energy that the council puts into their roles. We really do. We realize that you have jobs and lives and families too. Umatilla seems to be changing and growing rapidly, and there is a lot for the city council to read, research, and stay on top of. Have all of you read the 181 pages in this agenda packet? Plus, understand it all. It's a lot to expect, which is the reason that we implore you to say no tonight. And let's have the city take this to LUBA. Thank you for your consideration.
Thank you. We have Kathy Payne.
My name is, here it goes. Okay, my name is Kathy Payne. I live at 156 Rio Senda Street with my husband Les. I've lived in Umatilla for 40 years and I unfortunately have never done business with UEC. Just wanted to get that on the record. When I knew that I might be speaking with the city council, I wanted to become familiar with what your responsibilities were, what we could expect to do. So I looked up cityofumatilla.gov And I'll try to keep it brief. I'll quote a few things, and I'm paraphrasing, so please bear with me. Quote, under the city charter, the city council is the legislative power of the city of Umatilla and has the power to provide for keeping the public informed of the purposes, needs, and conditions of the city government. So I need to ask, what is the definition of public? The only people informed about the McNary to Wanapa transmission line were the people who lived within 100 feet of the project, even though it will impact other members of the public in Umatilla. One of the city council goals for the 2023 to 2025 is, quote, to expand public involvement opportunities, unquote. Not everyone is able to attend or live stream council and planning meetings. Not everyone is tech savvy either. So can the minutes of the city council and city planning commission be posted online in an easily accessible way? That's just my little wish list. Quote, whenever possible, provide opportunities for the public to provide feedback on strategic plans, master plans, improvement plans, etc. Participation should be made as accessible as possible. Our feedback on the issue of the Wanapa line was limited by availability of notice. We had approximately 10 days notice to research a project that had been planned for a year or more. Quote, to develop and implement highly efficient and transparent communication methods with the public and engage all members of our community by eliminating barriers of participation. I don't believe that I'm the only Umatilla resident who feels that we have had to face barriers of lack of time and opportunity to gather information, and also issues of transparency concerning the Wanapa Line project. Quote, elected officials are expected to consider specific actions recommended by the city manager, unquote. This should not preclude city council members from doing their own research. And with the emphasis on technology in your goals, have the members of the city council done their own research as to the negative impacts of data centers and transmission lines on communities? Quote, elected officials are expected to interpret the needs and desires of the local community, unquote. How does the city determine the needs and desires of the local community? By limiting which citizens may express their needs and desires, by deciding who receives information about upcoming changes? There needs to be a more positive, inclusive assessment factor for the citizens of Umatilla. One of the council goals is, quote, to sustain, grow, and enhance the city's livability and quality of life. How do data centers do this? Did anyone research the negative aspects of these data centers or their sustainability? In about 5 minutes of time and utilizing reliable sources, I was able to find out that data centers use considerable, significant amounts of water, which constrain local water resources. They can have environmental impacts on improper disposal of treated water. They consume vast amounts of energy and electricity, possibly impacting costs for residents. And they necessitate construction of multiple power transmission lines, despite placement that will impact residents' quality of life, which we described to the Planning Commission. Even the desired outcome of goal number 2 in your goals said, quote, encourage development that is environmentally sensitive. And this is in direct opposition to objective 2.1, continue to strongly support and encourage the development of data centers. I believe that Amazon and UEC already know these negative aspects and more. They have paid staff and lawyers to do research. Have the Umatilla City Council members been able to do their own due diligence in researching this information and the ongoing impacts of increasing numbers of transmission lines needed for data centers that are already in the planning stages? Has the City Council been able to thoroughly research their decision concerning the Wanapa transmission line and its impact on the city and citizens of Umatilla? Are you really prepared with all the facts you need in order to make a well-informed decision?
Dave, that's your time.
I strongly urge you to vote no, and first, do no harm.
Thank you, Mrs. Mann. We appreciate that. Next, we have Linda Brink.
Linda Sherrill Brink, and I live at 152 West End.
Yeah, can you use the mic?
Oh. Is it on? Okay. Did you hear my name?
Yes.
Okay. Okay. I just have a couple of comments about, what was said earlier. They said that the view was taken into consideration, and I'm wondering what their findings were on that. And I'm also wondering, does this project, state anywhere about what future lines may or may not come in? Are they gonna add more? I haven't heard anything about that, like 10 years from now, is it gonna be covering the hill? I don't know that. That was a question I had. And I wanted to say that my letter also contained hard factual evidence. It was not generic. And the fire risk is not, well, okay. This is not just about the north side of Rio Center. We don't think we're special because that view is enjoyed, but there's always people down at the viewpoints. And I have friends that come from all over the country and say, sitting out on your deck and watching the world go by is our favorite place to be. So this impacts more than just however many houses there are on the north side of Rio Center. And I would also like to say that I appreciate people from it. I know I've done stuff like that in Hermiston, and I know it's time consuming and frustrating, and so thank you. I guess I don't understand why UEC is so insistent on constructing these lines in this location where there is so much to lose. Why do they have to be constructed on this side of the highway instead of that side? I know they say they have addressed that to us, but appropriate, they say this side is appropriate, but we're saying it is not. I think everybody knows that there is an impact, an undesirable impact of those poles going in where they're going. I think the UEC knows that, and I think their attorneys know that. I think they just don't care. UEC is a co-op, not a giant corporation. They are supposed to take care of their neighbors. They know the disturbance, disruption, and lack of stewardship that the proposed route will cause. And so do their attorneys, and so do they. Why does UEC want to drag this out? We'll all incur what should be misspent money fighting it, not to mention the suits that are surely to be filed for diminishing property values and loss of enjoyment and well-being. What about our responsibility for the gorgeous panorama with which we've been blessed? Have we learned nothing about stewardship of the land and of wildlife? What do we tell our children and grandchildren? Yeah, we let that happen. Sorry. Animals will likely flee during the construction, and I may flee as well. I'm an elderly woman living alone. Please don't do this to me. I have no capacity to stop this, but you do.
Thank you, Judge.
Hi, Jen Peterson, Riverside. We are not customers of UEC, and we will not probably get benefits from them. So I have a transmission line running 300 feet in front of my house, 300 feet. Would you guys want that in front of your house? Would you want your kids playing in front of that? No, I don't think so. And I don't think they would either. And they bring their lawyers here. Where are our lawyers? Where are our lawyers? They were. Where are? So, my property value, yeah, they say that's not important. And they really
disregard us, and they really make us feel like we're not important. We are important. We live here. We pay to live here. So my property value is 10 to 40%. Are you guys gonna make that up for me? When my husband, who is laying at home dying of pancreatic cancer? That's what we do. 100% of his day is spent laying there on the couch, looking at our view, which is not important to them. 300 feet in front of my house, no way. I'm not gonna deal with it. I'm not gonna put up with it, and I'm a lawyer, and I'm gonna make them stop. It's not right. They give cows and groundwater more priority than us. So we pay to live here. Cows and groundwater. More important than we are. Seriously, it's more important than we are. So when my husband does survive, or any of the other widows that could be here in the future, I'll just tell them, when I have to sell my house, just follow the transmission line down the riverside. That's where you're gonna find my house, in front of a river, in front of a freaking transmission line, 300 feet. No, not 300 feet, not 800 feet, not in front of my house. I'm not gonna put up with it, and I will not. Nobody should have this shoved in their face. They have more money than we know what to do with. And they're gonna sit there and they're gonna force it in our faces because they have money and it's okay. They've got their criteria. I'm so sick of hearing about their criteria. What about our feelings? What about what we have worked for all our lives? Does that mean anything to these people? These attorneys who are sitting here? Doesn't mean anything. So I'm just saying, no, I don't want this thing 300 feet in front of my house. I have a fight already I have in front of my house, at my house. And now I got this in front of me? No, I want it shoved in my face. I don't want it in my front door. I don't want it in my front window. No.
Jennifer Franks.
My name is Jennifer Franks, and I'm from 24 Douglas Springs. My name is Jennifer Franks, and I'm a tribal member of the Confederated Tribes of the Colville Indian Reservation and citizen of Umatilla for 17 years. Thank you for hearing my concern. The Columbia River is my home, sacred to me, and it's sacred to my family. In our tribe, when we build knowing we are responsible to the next 7 generations. It doesn't feel like you consider the consequence of one. We need to hold ourselves accountable to the future generations and then to ensure that our environment isn't any more disruptive than it already is. I urge you to advocate on behalf of your constituents that there has to be alternative energy solutions to these problems. Thank you for your time.
Heidi Said.
Put their phone away while people are talking. So far, I've seen, maybe it's not talking to some super stuff.
She has her agenda.
Oh, thank you. It didn't look like you could see it.
Heidi Side, 120 Rio Senda. I have concerns about the lack of foresight and planning for enterprise zones that have led to the UEC proposal for transmission lines. While economic growth is undoubtedly important, it should not come at the expense of our community's well-being and the preservation of our precious resources. As a council, you've committed our city to industrial growth that cannot be supported without directly impacting our views, our power grid, our water rights, our land values, and our quality of life. Planning for industrial growth should have included proactive measures for the consequences of growth. Codes and plans should have been changed to protect us before entering into enterprise zone agreements to attract industry. With planning and proactive thinking, reasonable routes for power lines that would obviously be needed for data centers would have been identified, and zoning could have been changed to ensure we never got to this point. But here we are. UEC claims no route exists, because none have been proposed in their appeal, but we showed it in our testimony. Just because UEC didn't supply the route doesn't mean it didn't exist. Farm zone exceptions apply whether they want to push them to use them or not. Not only was asking for the raw data appropriate for the planning commission's decision, that's the type of data you all should have asked before you got us into all these enterprise zones. Fire hazards may not be a concern to UEC, but it's a huge concern for our neighborhood, and it should have been in the code before you decided to sell our community to industry. Our city's stunning riverfront views should have been protected from industrial encroachment. Instead, we are likely the last people to remember what our increased industrial activity has placed a burden on infrastructure, and that's why we're here, because industry needs more power. You as the council have unanimously approved every enterprise zone and industrial growth proposal that staff has presented with little to no discussion or questions that any of us can find and where we can find publicly documented minutes or documentation. What have we got as citizens for all this industrial growth? Well, we've grown 48% since 2010, yet our basic roadways and options for travel haven't changed much. Yesterday, I saw a line of people stop from the light at Crossroads back all the way up to River Road, because that's what we lived at. We also have a city celebrated median household income that grew from 42,000 in 2010 to 56,000 in 2024, and a 35% increase is exciting, but it's not even keeping up with the county at 37%, and that includes us in their numbers, or the state, which is over 80,000. Our county's unemployment rate average for October was 4.1%, which is awesome, and just more than the state's rate at 4%. While the data centers have gotten tax breaks and water rights, my utilities have gone up. In 2018, the base cost and average use for Umatilla home was $102.69. Today it's $152.25, an increase of 53.18%. And it's now more expensive to pay basic utilities in Umatilla than Boardman, Hermiston, or Milton. As a small business owner, I benefited from a downtown revitalization grant, and I appreciate it. I also lost 4 parking spaces. I'm still waiting for the proposed parking or the city promised parking lot and for the sidewalk work that began in 2020 to be finished. I have holes in front of my store, dead trees, some of which are covered by cones. I brought this up verbally, in texts, in emails, and finally this fall, I just asked, could you please at least replace the cones? Because they were so sun-worn that they had cracked and were falling apart. They'd been there for 5 years. What have the data centers got in those same 5 years? Agreements for these enterprise zones were made without the involvement or approval from other taxing agencies in the community, even though you routed their money, tax money that would have been theirs, you took it, kept it, and don't share it. This is going to LULA. No matter what happens tonight, UEC is going to appeal, or we will. Someone's going to. We're not lawyers, but we've been forced to dive into code and figure all this out because we're the city's impacted citizens going up an energy company with budgets and lawyers. And we're doing our best.
Hi.
This fight isn't fair.
You know? I miss you.
I think that's your grandmother.
Yeah, you can't. Oh my gosh, your first.
It's person.
You're in trouble.
Let me try and compose myself. Teresa White Snyder, also known as Tub's wife to my grandson. First of all, with respect to all council members, I want to stress it's your duty to represent the needs of the citizens. The Oregon Secretary of State's office declares that, quote, city councils serve as the highest authority within city governments in deciding issues of public policy. In open public forums, city councils pass laws, ordinances, adopt resolutions, and generally conduct some discussions involving the governance of their communities and the welfare of their citizens, unquote. The city council is elected by the people of Umatilla to make decisions that serve the needs of the people that live and work here. Throughout the approval of the enterprise zones and recruitment agreements for business, the city council has had numerous opportunities to work to represent the needs of the people in our community. While the city government has benefited greatly from these many decisions, the citizens have not. Instead, we've experienced increased utility costs, increased traffic from people commuting to but not living in Umatilla, lack of communication from the city, and lack of transparency. Attending meetings online is difficult. I had to do that this week, and it was a bear cat just to even find where I could find the link to watch it. The webpage is really hard to navigate as well, and it's not like I'm computer illiterate. I can't imagine if it didn't work still and know my way around. I can understand why people don't watch online or attend. The city manager frequently brings up topics in his quote, city manager's report, unquote, that aren't on the agenda ahead of time. So how can I know that that's going to be discussed and be here if I'm interested in and wanting to know more about that? Lack of published minutes for the years in which the enterprise zones were approved. Lack of written notice about the agreements the city made in regard to our water, our services, and commitments to businesses so we could be aware and have input. Frequent claims from the city manager about proprietary information, quote unquote, for things that should be public record and that impact the broader community that aren't questioned or challenged by any of you on the council. UEC references plans and codes that should have taken these areas into consideration. How can we meaningfully provide input with all the communication issues that exist? The UEC appeal gives lots of legal verbiage and talking back and forth. As citizens, we're not in the know on these laws, but we understand the impact of the decision you're about to make. It affects each of us as homeowners and to our entire community. We're relying on you to vote no on the UEC appeal today. This will likely end up in LUBA, but when it does, the city can hire the attorneys to defend our decisions you make on our behalf. Citizens shouldn't have to burden that. We want to put it back on your shoulders. You got us all here by approving these enterprise zones and commercial changes without fully planning for the impact of us citizens. We're counting on you to bail us out.
Thank you. Next, we have Aaron Johnson.
Aaron Johnson, 186 Rio Senda. I do want to point out that our planning commission isn't here to address any of UEC's statements about what that planning commission was or was not thinking or considering. Do not disregard their time or talent considering this matter. They considered the application and denied it. That should count for something. I also want to point out that the notice of appeal that I received has 3 points and that UEC has already argued 4. Complete the slides. In the notice of appeal, UEC claims that the planning commission has made a factual error by claiming that, quote, the applicant did not satisfy section 10.12.1 alpha 4 because as addressed in this report, UEC submitted initial response included an alternative route located within the city's urban growth boundary located on the south side of Highway 730, unquote. The factual error that is claimed by the UEC is that, quote, the applicant did not present any alternative routes south of Highway 730 that are wholly within the city's urban growth boundary, end quote. This is a fallacy of equivocation. The UEC is substituting meanings and claiming that our planning commission meant something that it never intended to mean. At no point did the planning commission state and or mean that the alternative route was wholly in the city's urban growth boundary, only that there are other routes with less impact on our community because our planning commission considered our community. In fact, no factual error exists, and therefore there is no grounds for an appeal based on the alleged error. UEC also claims that there is no legal basis in the code for the planning commission to reject a proposal based on the potential availability of other alternative sites that have not been proposed, unquote. They rightfully claim, quote, that the code does not require an applicant to consider alternatives to the site proposed in an application, much less that the applicant demonstrate that other sites are not available or that the proposed site is the best site, unquote. While the code doesn't require these things, neither does the code prohibit them. In reality, there's no legal basis not to consider alternative routes that might have a lesser impact on the community. Point number 2, UEC claims that the Planning Commission findings are, quote, in error for similar reason as the finding discussed above, in that it denies the application based on the requirement that it's not in the code. Specifically, the findings attempts to require the application to not only submit a routing study that shows different alternative routes, but it also attempts to require the applicant to submit the raw data on which any such study is based. Neither of those requirements appear in the code language at issue, unquote. Again, while there doesn't appear to be a legal requirement, there also doesn't appear to be a legal prohibition either. As such, there is no legal basis not to request additional information. Information the UAC had, as they claim to have already done these studies and decided not to share, at least not in total. The applicant makes the claim that, quote, the only analysis the Planning Commission was authorized to undertake while implementing this code section was an analysis of the proposed development on the chosen site. They assert the restriction on authorization, but they do not cite an authority that restricts the Planning Commission's analysis. They imply that it might be there, but they can't point to it. If the applicant could demonstrate where the Planning Commission's authorization was legally restricted, then it might have grounds for a real appeal. Point number 3, the appeal based on the consideration of fire hazards is essentially the same as the first 2, as demonstrated by the applicant when they write, as with the other errors discussed above, this portion of the findings attempts to impose a requirement that is not in the code. Specifically, it purports to require the applicant to demonstrate how any fire hazards associated with the transmission line compared to fire hazards if the line were located along an alternative route. Where the law does not require the consideration of fire hazards, it also does not prohibit the consideration of fire hazards. The strength of this appeal is weak, and I ask you to uphold the Planning Commission's decision to deny this application and force UEC to consider a different place other than the middle of our community to put this power line. Thank you for your time.
Thank you, Mr. Johnson. Next, we have Steve Johnson.
Can you hear me? You hear myself? Listen, I was certainly am not prepared to give a speech that I've heard all of you do. And I do appreciate every one of you for what you've said. My name is Steve Johnson, and I own the house on 186 Rio Cinda. I moved into that house in 1991, and I moved out of that house in 2013. And I moved to Northern Idaho, beautiful country, mountains, trees, lakes. But one thing it does not have is it does not have the sunset that Umatilla has. That is the most beautiful sunset I have ever seen. And when you put the volcanoes in the background and the shadows of the volcanoes, it's unbelievable. I used to sit out on my deck there in Rio Cinda for hours, just watching the mountains. But the sunset wasn't quite hours long. Anyway, I don't have a whole lot to say. It seems to me that we're being a little bombasted here. Maybe we do need the lawyers. So far, I've been talked to by lawyers and, you know, I can't compete with that, you know. And I guess maybe that's where we are. I'm not afraid of that. I don't know if anybody else is, but, I guess bring it on. That's all I have to say. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Johnson.
Oh, by the way, I was on city council for about 12 years. But it wasn't as complicated as this, so you guys do have a difficult.
Thank you, Mr. Johnson. Next, we have Angela.
I agree with what he said. The sunsets are awesome. And Robinson,
Hey, Robin, you're in on. Can you state your address for me?
928 Barton Loop, which is a little dinky place, little loop over that nobody ever finds. We're between the golf course and the grain elevator and the river.
Now I know right where you're at. It's my whole life. I read one. Thank you so much for being here. We're gonna do Stacy, right, Preacher.
Stacy Pickard, I live at 164 Rio Cinda, lived in Utah for approximately 10 years. We bought this property about 4 years ago. We bought it mainly for the view. My concern is the value of my house is going to decrease. And I also believe that it could affect taxes as well. The value of the property might increase, but I doubt the taxation of it. Just my thoughts on that. Please vote no.
And then next we have Monique. I called you Kate.
Monique McMillan, 154 Rio Senate. And I, like last time, still opposed. Please vote no.
Thank you. Mary Cagle.
Mary Cagle, 180 Rio Senda. Read everyone that spoke, just gonna say the same things I am. I'm just asking you to say no. And I know this is gonna go to Luba, one way or the other. Us, you say no now. If we need an attorney, it will help us to fight this with legal counsel. When we go to that. I just want to mention a couple other things while their attorney was Mr. Brooks was speaking. He had said last time at the planning commission that one of the members had asked him specifically, did you apply to use south of 730? And he said, no, we can't apply, and we didn't apply. We can't apply until there's not an alternative route. So they said no, and so it appears that they still haven't applied. And then today, though, he sounded like he kind of changed what he was saying, though. He had said last time that they didn't know. Sorry, I'm just making notes off of what he had said. But today he had said that they can't legally use that south of 730, if I understood correctly, because there is a more suitable route. Well, how would he know that they can't use that when he told us at the last meeting that they haven't even applied? So I just not buying it. So I'm just begging you and asking you, please vote no. Thank you.
Next, we have the general tests.
Donna Pesh, 124 Rio. I first wanted to start by saying thank you for your willingness to serve your community and for the time that this takes. I understand it's a lot. We've only lived here a short time, or I have only lived here a short time. My husband grew up here, but I have been visiting family here for over 20 years, and I've seen the changes that have happened in Umatilla over those 20 years. How the improvements that have been made to beautify the city, and My husband will tell you I love a good renovation project. I like to make old things pretty, so I can appreciate the things that have been done to the city to make it beautiful and to improve it for the citizens. So thank you. I'm here tonight because I feel like a great mistake could be made, and I want to do my part as a citizen of this community to make sure that that doesn't happen. All we're asking UEC to do is to do the right thing. Just to do the right thing for our community. And the right thing in our mind, my mind, and I think in all of our minds, is to find another place to put their blinds. In regards to the consideration of alternative route that was in the UAC's appeal, they said in there that the route that was considered, that it considered would mean placing them on agricultural resource lands, which are generally more difficult to develop with non-farm uses. Generally, meaning it might be more difficult. Now, I know that they explained today that there could be a reason why they couldn't build on these alternate routes. But as Mary stated, they haven't tried. The UEC and its lawyers are not looking out for our community, and they're not doing what is best for our community. They're doing what is best for their client, which would be to get lines to their data centers in the fastest and cheapest way possible. They're using our community and whatever loophole they can find to get what they want. That's their job. Their job is not to consider the lasting effects this would have on McNary residents, on Umatillo's natural beauty, or the community as a whole. Thankfully, that is your job. And I would also just like to point out that the argument that Mr. Brooks made, it seemed to be, your city code and comprehensive plan doesn't say we can't build there. I have 4 kids. When I hear you didn't say I couldn't do it, like that usually means, yes, I didn't say you couldn't, but that doesn't mean you should. And I think that's what we're all saying here tonight. Along that stretch in McNary, where these lines would go, we have 2 public lookout points for the community to admire the breathtaking view of the Columbia River. A nature preserve with beautiful trails for the community to enjoy, and a row of houses built with many windows on their north sides for one purpose and one purpose only, the view. My house in particular has no windows that look out onto the street on the south. 0. All of the windows on my house point to the river to take advantage of the amazing view. Because these public viewpoints exist, I can only assume that the city of Umatilla recognizes the importance and amazing gift that this view is. And I can guarantee that not one person is going to go to those viewpoints to enjoy the scenery, look at those huge structures blocking the view and say, now that's an improvement. It would in fact be the opposite of an improvement. And if you were to look it up in a source, the opposite of improvement, you would see words like it would be a decline, a deterioration, a degradation, or a downgrade. I'm asking you to not downgrade Umatilla when you've worked so hard to improve it. So please say no. Thank you. Thank you, Dr.
During session.
My name is Jared Tesh, and I'm currently a resident at 124 Rio Senda, and that is my much better half. I was born in Umatilla in 1978 at a small 2-room hospital that once existed right downtown, not far from here. My parents have lived here their entire married life, specifically in McNary. I've loved growing up, learning, and serving here. Ironically, I was even honored as a Grand Marshal of its Landing Day Parade in my teen years for my efforts serving and loving our community. After graduating high school, I've been privileged to live and travel in other parts of the state, country, and even overseas, as I have sought formal education, public service experiences, and employment opportunities. This last year, I was blessed to be able to return home to serve as principal of my old high school. It has been a dream come true. I've also had the good fortune to move into a home back in McNary near my family, with my own family. This week, Councilor Funderburk informed us all that we are actually considered a medium-sized city. For me, it is exciting to see the growth of our town. I have and will always be an advocate for growth. After all, if you're not growing, you're dying. That being said, one reason I have chosen to return to Umatilla is I appreciate the true community that exists here. For good or for bad, everyone knows each other and looks out for one another. I've lived in communities of all sizes, and this is simply not the case everywhere else. On Tuesday, many of you expressed similar sentiments about our community. In fact, you have volunteered, and we are grateful for your service as you represent our best interests in serving on this council. You can read our many comments, and you've heard them tonight, from the Planning Commission meeting to learn how strongly we feel, the collective citizens of Umatilla feel about this. Umatilla has approximately 7 miles of riverfront. Unfortunately, most of this is not accessible or has already been developed and full of other transmission lines, as we all know. We believe it is in the interest of this community to preserve this last remaining piece of Riverview and Sunset. UEC might legally have the right to construct these lines, but just because you can doesn't mean you should. They have selected this route because it is the cheapest. My guess is they thought they would just push it past us. Even tonight, they have tried to express as fact items that are actually the opinions of their legal counsel based on their legal interpretations to meet their own business interests. Tonight, UEC has stated that their application was not challenged. Again, we would argue that this was because the community was not informed. They didn't want us to know because clearly, once we found out, we have showed up. They have even said tonight that their proposal is only one of the ways to get there, quote unquote. Tonight, you have the ability to represent the individual citizens of Umatilla against arrogant and forceful business partners with limited interest in making our community a better place as it grows. If UEC actually cares for our community and wants to be our partner, as they say, then simply find another route that would be best for everyone, period. Please represent our community and vote to deny this application. And if UEC insists on appealing it to LUPA, then please stand by us there as well. Thank you for your service.
Thank you. Next, we have Clint Hill.
My name is Clint Hill. I live at 190 Rio Senda Street. I have not lived here my whole life, and most of the things I was about to say, my boss just took, so thanks for that. I would like to second the comments of my fellow community members and add that there is a difference between what is legally allowable and what is morally right. There have been a lot of issues raised tonight that many citizens see as clear issues in decision-making in the past. We don't have to keep making. We can change direction. It's not too late. I hope that you will stand with the needs and desires of the citizens of Umatilla and not the needs of outside corporations that do not add, and in fact, only take from our community. Please vote no.
Thank you. Next, we've got Scarlett Pearson. Sir, can we bring the microphone to you? Yeah. Thank you.
Yeah, my name's Scott Beardsley. I live at 188 Rio Senda. I'm not a educated man, but instead I have common sense, and common sense says to vote no. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Next, we have Susan Taylor.
Hi, Susan Taylor, 94 Barton. Thank you guys for all the hard work of the city council meetings all the time. And I just want to say no. I mean, my husband and I built that house ourselves. We put every board and every window, everything. And then my husband had his last dying breath looking out at the view that he loves. The house will always be in my family, and I do not want my grandchildren to have to look at the transmission line. It would be right now. Thank you very much.
Next, we have testimony in favor. We have Ryan, Eval.
Hello, City Council, Mayor. My name is Ryan Devo. I live in Wenatchee, Washington.
Please call your address for the record.
Sure. 176 Stony Brook Lane.
Thank you.
I'm a vice president for Savvy Data Center. It's a hard act to follow, but it's hard to say anything. They heard me telling that after listening to all the testimony here. But I did come here tonight to speak. I don't blame anyone. They don't care to hear what I have to say right now, but I do want to, and I did hear some comments about data centers, and so I'd like to take this opportunity to say that there is another data center company, that would like to move into the store. And we're different. We're a lot more open, we're less secretive. I really want to be a part of this community. I've got campus in Quincy and campus in Wenatchee, and each one of them has about 200 permanent full-time jobs. They're good jobs. We invest a lot in building a workforce development pipeline, working with the public school system and community colleges, so that we can hire local people. And I've gotten to a point now, and it takes time to get to 200 employees, it'll take time to get to, but I've gotten to a point there where I hire exclusively local people who grew up there. I'm not wanting to bring people from the outside. They want to hear what the public benefit. And so, we also aren't going to use any water. Our design is not use any water or cooling or possible. So if given the opportunity, we're allowed to serve power to our site, which is off of Wanaka Road, across the street from the correctional facility. That's what I intend to do here. And to do what I can to improve the community, to help grow the community. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Next, we'll have legal testimony. Different on this issue. Next, we'll have rebuttal testimony from the applicant.
Again, Tommy Brooks for Hematology Cooperative. I think I can keep the rebuttal pretty short. Again, we're not here to discount what people feel about the project or where they live. We really are here to address what's required to address. I heard very little about that in the second. We heard a lot about views. We heard a lot about property values, other things that the planning commission decided, and that's not what we try to do. Those issues are set, and it really is just this one criteria that your code allows you to now address. A lot of what I heard was a cry for better planning, right? Are the enterprise zones set up the right way? I don't know. Is your zoning adequate for the way your city has grown? I don't know. Those issues can be brought to you when you are acting legislative capacity. And I totally agree, that's one of your jobs. When you are acting in a legislative capacity. Tonight you're acting in a judicial capacity. And those questions may be important to the community, but they're not in front of you right now. And so if you feel the need to respond to that cry for better planning, you have a process to do that. Again, you can't change the rules in the middle of the game. I've even heard people say it pretty clearly that just because you can't do it, doesn't mean you should do it. Well, that's a legislative question. That's something you should ask before you set up. The city's not a siting. New grocery store wants to come into town. You don't tell it where to go. You designate it as commercial areas where the grocery store can go. And that's how this process works. And I fully understand that's not very gratifying. But that's what the law is, and that's the law we have to follow. There was a little bit of discussion about the EFU question and whether or not we can be in the farm zone. I think my rebuttal to that is we've provided you the legal basis. We've provided you the statutory citations and testimony about how that works. The counter testimony was, we don't believe you. That's really hard for me to rebut. If someone, I heard someone say there's exceptions to it, well, you have to identify those exceptions. You can't guess what you think those exceptions are. And I've acknowledged there are some exceptions. They just don't apply in this particular situation. And so, yes, that's exactly the discussion we have with planning commission. Have you tried? No, because the law doesn't let you. I'll tell you exactly what I told. I'm not going to invite my client to file an application without legally approval. So that's, you can ask us to do 10 other things, but that's not how this process works. We have an application, we're addressing the criteria. I think unless the city council has questions, I'm going to leave my rebuttal at that.
Any questions from council? I'm looking for a motion to close the record.
Mr. Mayor, are we going to hear from our council on this matter?
I'm not sure.
Counselor, can I get by May? Once the record is closed, there's an opportunity as your next vigilance item for council to deliberate. At that point, we won't be able to take any more comments from the public, but you do have the opportunity then to deliberate amongst yourself as well as ask myself, staff, or legal counsel question if you want clarification. But my recommendation would be to close the public hearing and then move into the deliberation mode, and then you're more than welcome to ask questions of legal counsel.
Give your advice, looking for motion to close.
Mr. Mayor, I'd like to make a motion to close the public record and enter back into our regular session.
Thank you. We're not entering a little session, right? We're still staying on closing the record.
Correct. We're just closing the public record and then.
Can you rephrase that to not meeting this information?
Okay, I'd like to make a motion to close the record.
Thank you. Can I get a second for the motion, please?
I'll second that.
All in favor?
10.
You got 9 seconds.
Here's the way for one council member to come to the bathroom, so it's too fast, I do apologize, but it's supposed to be just here. And do we need to have a motion to go back into, we just, or down with recess for good? Okay. The council now move on to deliberations this time. Is there any questions or comments from council? Councilor Time, you mentioned you'd like to talk about lawyers' responses.
Yes, Mr. Mayor, thank you. I would like to have input from, city's council on this matter.
Well, hi, that's me. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Sure. So, yeah, no, my name is David Peterson. I'm an attorney at Tonkin Torp, and my firm is counsel to the city. Are there specific questions you'd like me to answer?
So I guess I would like you, and I've read in the provided statements, but I would just like to hear what what our council's thoughts are on where we are and how how we see.
Counselor Tennick, I'm going to ask that you speak into your microphone, please. Thank you.
You're just looking for some general thoughts for me. So, I mean, I believe the procedural posture has been presented to you correctly. This is an appeal on a quite a limited grounds. There's only, of the multiple criteria that the planning commission considered, they found them all met except for this one, and this is the one that was appealed, and the finding that the other criteria were met was not appealed. So I know there's been some discussion about trying to drift over, not trying to, but drifting over into some of the other criteria. There's one about community impacts and things like that. I mean, we're really focusing on the appropriateness of the site. And if you look at your code section about what are some of the factors to be considered when deciding if a site is appropriate, we're talking about kind of more physical ground-based criteria, if you will. Then, what's the land use on the site? What's the adequacy of access? Is the site the right size? Is it configured properly? Does it have adequate public facilities? That doesn't apply in this particular case, but would apply in a different kind of project. So we're really looking at kind of the physical nature of the site. Is it appropriate for the proposed use? Mr. Brooks talked about the unavailability of other routes that would require them to use EFU land in the county. And he's correct about that. That is precisely what Oregon state law requires. For a utility facility to be placed on EFU land, you have to demonstrate that it's necessary, and there's a number of factors that, if they exist, would prevent a utility facility from being approved across EFU land, and one of them is that there's other available urban and non-resource lands. So, they provided you with a routing study that showed alternative routes, if you will, and I'm going to put alternatives in air quotes because they weren't really alternatives. I think the purpose of it was to demonstrate that there were no alternatives, because every other route that would even make any sense just from a matter of looking at a map couldn't be done because of the EFU zoning. Mr. Seitz made the point early on in his presentation about how this, or maybe it was Mr. Brooks, one of them, about how, this land is actually zoned for public facilities uses. And I did hear quite a bit of testimony from the public that perhaps they wish it wasn't. And that is, that's a planning consideration for another day. for this council, but right now you have to apply the goalposts that you have, and the goalposts that you have have shown that the city has planned this site for utility facility. So, it's not my decision to make. Obviously, it's yours. I don't have anything to change from my memorandum. But I did at least want to confirm for you that that the state law is exactly what Mr. Brooks says, and that sites that would require the use of EFU land in the county wouldn't be approved, and if the county did approve them, that would be vulnerable to appeal. I don't want to drift too far into kind of. I would prefer to maybe answer more specific questions rather than to just to pontificate on the matter at hand in a general sense. So if you have any other questions, I'd be happy to answer them.
I don't, thank you.
I have one question. So based on what I heard, it sounded like planning had made a decision that from the findings tonight, it was non-factual information. The sense, but basically it was incorrect. So is this something that council can ask planning to revisit and reconsider their decision? If it was based on non-factual information?
The question is, can you essentially remand it back to the planning commission for further consideration? I honestly don't know the answer to that. That might be a Brandon question.
So I believe council needs to address the factual error. I believe I addressed that the one error where the transmission line that runs along the south side of Highway 730 does actually cross into EFU zoning. I think council could address that here. The other item to consider, I don't have a specific answer on the remand. The other item I would just bring to council's attention is in Oregon, since we are a city, we are statutorily required to make a land use decision within 120 days from an application being submitted and being complete. Today is our 120th day. So if we do not make a decision tonight, that does open up other opportunities for the applicant to be able to take that decision-making power away from the city. So my advice would be that council likely needs to make the decision tonight, but I'm happy to answer any other questions.
Yeah, that's right. With the 120-day clock, that wouldn't be feasible. And I would have also say that even if it was feasible, a remand would be extremely unusual.
Yeah, just to follow up, in that case, I think that factual error is small enough that we can note that in the findings and get that corrected.
Any further deliberation by council? I will say, it is exceptionally hard to hear that level of comment against them. From a business that I lived in Umatilla my entire life. I own a home in Umatilla. Never once have we seen a provider of power to. The fact that the fire wasn't real, proved they weren't sitting in my house watching a fire occur, a power line that fell over. 2019, 2020, I can't recall exactly, but there was. I was there. Virus was away. That's fine. It's hard not to say the viewpoints. They are. I grew up going to Carmen's there, seeing people enjoy the sunset and have particularly the time. And growing up here, those places are. Susan, breaks my heart here. You and your husband enjoyed the last best. Seeing it had the chance to be taken away by a corporation, by something that would serve that. And the fact that from city legal counsel, UBC's legal counsel, the fact of the matter is that hindsight's 2020. And a better planning and work by our city staff to ensure that our community was protected wasn't there. That's all I have.
I'd like to add some comments, Mr. Mayor. I agree 100%. You know, we are in probably the most difficult position that I've, we're sitting in this chair. We are between the proverbial rock and hard. It doesn't matter what we do, it will be rock. And what we are, though, is bound by law. We're also bound by our comprehensive plan, our code, our zoning, that, you know, needed to be addressed prior to tonight. Whatever the decision that's made tonight will undoubtedly land with food. And my heart says I encourage this to land before move up, because for this exact reason that you've all stated tonight very passionately. I've said many times before, this community is full of passion, and I love it. I thank you for it. We live in a very special place. We do. Again, we are bound by law. We can't just do what, you know, what legal, right? We have to do what's legal. And the only thing that's in front of us tonight, and unfortunately, we can't, you know, even consider all of the testimony tonight. We can only consider what's in here. Now, there are many testimonies that are within this package that, you know, we absolutely, and I can tell you that I did read every word in this many times, and to the point where, yeah, it's.
Well, Councilmember Tyne, you can consider the testimony.
I'm sorry?
Is that correct? You can consider the testimony, Brandon? They spoke about this evening, not just what was in the packet, is that correct?
So you were not allowed to consider new evidence being submitted into the record.
Okay, so, you know, and I don't want to, you know, I don't want to wash out, you know, what's taking place here tonight.
Well,
I do feel like, you know, we have one single decision to make here tonight, and that is whether or not the site is appropriate for you. And I believe that our comp plan, our building, our codes says it says it, and I'm sorry, but that's what it said. I feel like my hands are tied. I don't feel that to uphold the planning commission's decision and then go to move it is the right path. I don't. I feel that to overturn the planning commission's decision and then for this to go to move is the right.
I think it's imperative that this council recognizes that if we vote yes on this, returning back to us. Here,
Can you restate that, Mr. Mayor? I'm not sure I understood what you said.
I think that if council votes yes on this, return our backs for it.
So I would like to offer that not turning my back on my community. I'm doing this. I'm doing this law. I'm doing what I know. As in my judicial capacity. That's what I believe. And I will not back away. And I'm sorry. I truly am sorry. This breaks my heart.
This reminds me of recently when we were looking at the housing development up on Power Line. And we kind of started getting into the weeds and we were asking questions and we had to continue to be redirected that you can't make the decision tonight based on these questions that you're providing or that you're asking. And I know a comment that was stated already is there's a difference between legislation and judicial. And I completely agree with Rohit. I've been really quiet tonight just because I'm taking it all in, but it's because there's a lot of emotion and a lot of fact, like fighting with each other. But when it comes down to the state law, I would love to hear from you ladies as well, but at this point, it feels like that's kind of a decision we need to focus on. The one question on the state at the beginning.
Yeah. As hard as it is, this is one of the toughest decisions, like, you know, this is my second year up here. This is the first time I had to go through this big of a deliberation. You know, I've been sitting back, maybe quiet, but the wheels are turning and stuff. And as much as my heart cries for you guys and hurts for you, I have very good friends that live on Riverside Road, live over by Barton. I've lived here a long time. We go to that viewpoint, we see everything, you know, we do all that. And we're not dismissing any of your testimonies or anything, you know, we feel it, but we are in a very hard position. The question of tonight, now, really the only one we can answer is it a technical zone for that? And sadly, it is, legally. And I agree with Rohit, but I think that to overturn their appeal or overturn, what the planning commission did and take it to LUPA is the best decision because then we come back stronger as a community to try and go fight. But legally, we are bound. And I know that's hard to side by us and hard to understand, but we're kind of in a hard place. We're in a lose-lose situation no matter what. And we don't take this lightly at all. This is not easy at all. May I ask a question?
So, unfortunately, no. So to be clear, if we vote yes, and we overturn the planning commission's decision, the community would be entrusted to send that to them. If we vote no, and we decide to agree with the appeal, then it would be UEC's decision to take it to LUPA.
I'd like clarification from council on that, from the city's council.
Well, if you uphold the planning commission's decision and reject the appeal, then the most likely appellant at LUBA is going to be the applicant. That's correct. If you overturn the planning commission and approve the project, then it would be incumbent upon some party who participated in this hearing to bring an appeal to LUBA for it to go any further.
And so if we vote yes, we put it in the hands of our community members to do this alone.
Yeah, yes and no is kind of hard to answer because I don't know what the motion is, right? If the motion is to overturn the planning commission, then a yes vote would be in favor of UEC. If the motion is to uphold the planning commission, then a yes vote would be in favor of the opponents. So I would say don't think of it as yes or no. Think about it as uphold or overturn.
I want to call in sick. It's not an easy decision sitting up here. I mean, I've only, this is my first term and, man, testimony is just heart-wrenching something. But like Rohit said, you know, we're in a judicial capacity here. We have a decision that, you know, we have to follow law. And being on the council, you know, we have to obey and follow the laws. Otherwise, we're a tyrannical government, and I refuse to be a tyrannical government.
To be clear about that, Councilman, we're believing the laws told us by a lawyer, and the applicant who agrees with the, of course, the company who wishes to install it.
For you, partial conflict. And I think that he was referencing state, the Oregon state.
it's not an easy decision, Vaughn. And,
At this time, is there any other deliberations at this time? Okay, this time we're looking for a motion. We're looking for a vote. Nancy, do we want to do a vote in favor or against, or should we do ask for a motion? Sure.
Motions are usually done in the positive.
So this time, council, we're looking for.
So just to clarify, just like, go ahead, sorry.
Are you looking for some guidance on how to frame a motion?
Yes.
I would suggest that somebody make a motion to grant the appeal and overturn the planning commission's decision with respect to the specific criterion at issue, Umatilla Municipal Code 1012-1A4, and find that the criterion was met for certain reasons, whatever reasons are stated in the motion. And then if that motion receives a second, then a yes vote would be a vote to overturn the appeal and approve the project, overturn the planning commission and approve the project. And a no vote would be to uphold the planning commission.
So just for the record, we have to close the public hearing before we vote. So.
We close the record.
Close the record. I'm just curious because it says on the list of procedures, it says city council votes in decision.
Yep, that if you notice on your agenda, you have new business item, deliberations and decision on UEC's application or appeal.
Okay, so that says this concludes the introduction. We will begin our first business item on tonight's agenda. So we need a motion to go ahead and go back into our position.
Yes.
Ashley, do you have another motion?
I make a motion that we close the public hearing and enter into our regular.
Thank you for your motion. Can I get a second motion, please?
I'll second that.
All in favor?
Aye.
All opposed? This time we're on business item 6.1. We're looking for a motion to approve or deny the UEC application or appeal application.
Did someone else get all the details from council?
You want me to state it again?
Yes. Thank you.
I would frame the motion to say that you are going to grant the appeal, overturn the planning commission's decision, finding that this particular criterion was not met, and rule that the criterion is in fact met.
Thank you, sir. We're looking for a motion at this time.
Just a minute. Can you say that again? I'm sorry, I'm having a hard time.
That's okay. You're
Appeal.
going to grant the appeal, overturn the planning commission's decision that UMC 10-12-1A4 was not met, and instead find that code criterion is met. I mean, that's it, basically. Once you have that motion, then you can have some deliberation on why you think it either is or is not met.
Call for motion has been asked. I'm looking for a motion at this time.
I make a motion that we grant the appeal and overturn the planning commission's decision, finding that the land is met.
Thank you for your motion. Can I get a second to that motion, please?
I'll second that.
All in favor?
Aye.
All opposed?
Nay.
You guys have it? The application has been approved. At this time, ladies and gentlemen, we're looking for a motion to adjourn.
Mr. Mayor, I would move that we adjourn tonight's city council meeting.
Thank you. Can I get a second motion, please?
I'll second.
All in favor?
Aye.
All opposed?